Hi there, my name is Gabriel and welcome back to another EF Core 6 video. In today's video, we are going to look at EF Core's relationship API and see how we can use it to build and support one-to-one, one-to-many, and many-to-many relationships. Over the years, the EF Core's developer team has done some amazing work simplifying the process of adopting EF Core into our applications. One of the stumbling blocks um, around EF Core has always been how to build and structure relationships. And that was one of the main focuses with the EF Core's developer team when they built EF Core 6. Now, there's a lot of magic that happens behind the scenes in EF Core, and that magic is all based on the naming convention rules engine that has been built into EF Core. Now, the rules engine will apply default assumptions to your data model when EF Core tries to comprehend your data model. And all of those default assumptions can be overwritten by using naming conventions, just the way that you write your properties, and then also by applying annotations and configurations. And all of that we will have a look at in this video and also in the subsequent video, just to see how we can kind of apply and change those default assumptions. All right, so let's get started. So in this video, I'm going to step through the different relationships, and I'm going to use this student app application that we've been building together over the last, or since the first video of this series. So if you don't know, this application consists of a core library. The core library consists of the domain classes. Then we also have a data library for the data access. In there, we will have our student or our DB context with our DB sets, and that, well, these two projects together is kind of seen as our data model. And then we also have a service layer. And then we also have our front end application, which in this case is a web API application, but we're using that for our presentation layer for the moment. Then this video has an associated blog post, which you can access. And I will leave the link to the blog post below this video. And if you scroll down this blog post, you will find a link to download the starter code so that you can walk with me through the process of creating relationships. All right, so let's have a look at our data model. So as you can see, we have a little diagram, and our data model consists of a grade domain object, a course domain object, and a student domain object. And all three of those objects are not linked to each other, but we will create relationships between each one of those tables. Now, this tool that I've used to create this diagram is called EF Core's or EF Core Power Tools, and it's something that you install into Visual Studio. So if I go and right click, you'll see there's a menu item here, and I can go and create the diagram basically from this context menu. Now, if you don't have EF Core Power Tools installed, what you can do is you can click on the link below this video where, well, it will be the second link, and that link will give you a bit of a tutorial on how to create or add EF Core Power Tools to your Visual Studio. All right, so let's open up our diagram. So firstly, we want to build a one-to-many relationship. So in this scenario, we want to link grade to student, and we're saying that one grade can have many students, and each student can belong to one grade. All right, so that will be our one-to-many relationship. And what we'll do is we're going to go to the blog post, and we're going to copy this navigation property, and paste it into our grade class. All right, so here we're saying that we want a collection, or there should be a collection of students for every grade. Now, this here is part of the naming convention rule in EF Core. So if you have a plural form that's a collection property of a particular object, it's going to build that relationship for you. So EF Core is clever enough to look at our DB sets and determine, okay, there's a student DB set. Plural of that is students, and I assume you're trying to build a one-to-many relationship. All right. So what we can do now is we can add a migration. So I'm just gonna clean this, and I'm just gonna say add migration and call it relationship one-to-many. And then just give EF Core time to build the migration. And once it is done, you can see that EF Core is going to try and add a grade ID to the students table, right? And then it's going to specify that that must be a nullable type. Now, that doesn't seem right because we're saying that a grade must have a collection of students and a student must have must have an associated grade. So that there should be actually false. But okay, let's leave it for now. We'll change it shortly. And then what we can also see is that, okay, by default, EF Core is going to try and optimize the database. So it's going to try and add an index. And then, of course, it's going to build that relationship as well, which is the foreign key to the grade ID. Okay, fantastic. So now we have all that set, but we want to change the assumption here, and we want to tell EF Core it must have a mandatory grade ID for every student. So we're going to come here and we're going to say public int grade ID. And this will tell EF Core to go and add the grade ID column as mandatory. Now, once again, you can see here the naming convention is the name of the class concatenated with an ID. And this will be the name that EF Core will use, or they has already used it, to create that initial column. All right, so this is another naming convention that you should make note of. All right, so now if we go and remove this migration, we're just going to remove it. Or I'll remove the previous one, and then I'm going to re-add the new one. So let's just add the new one again. And let's just see if it now specifies, yep, it's now nullable is equal to false. So now we need to specify grade ID whenever we add a student. Okay. All right, so now if we want to, we can go and add a navigation property between student and grade, just so that we can navigate from the student object to the grade object. And in order to do that, we just need to add the following property. But that won't change anything in our database because the foreign key is already created and specified. All right, so if we want to see it, we can just remove that migration again. Why can't I remove the migration? Right, so now you can see we've added the navigation property, and of course has made no changes to the way it wants to generate the migration, and we are all set. Okay, so now if we go to our student context diagram, and we're just going to regenerate it. So I'm going to delete it and re-add it. All right, and now we can see we have a relationship between student and grade, and it's a one-to-many. All right, so next we want to add a many-to-many between student and course. So we're saying that each course can have many students, and each student can belong to many courses. All right. So in order to do that, we're just going to close all of this tabs. We are going to go to the blog post and scroll down to many-to-many relationships. And before we start, there are two methods that you can use in order to build many-to-many relationships. The first method is skip navigation, where basically you don't have a domain class. However, you still have that many-to-many relationship inside the database. And then the other option is to use the payload join table. And with the payload join table, you will have to have a many-to-many class in your domain, and add the additional properties that you want to use for the payload. But before we get there, let's just look at the skip navigation, because that's the easiest one. So in order to apply a skip navigation many-to-many relationship, we are going to copy the first navigation property, and this will be for courses. So we're going to add this to student. I'm going to go to my student class and add that navigation property. And once again, look at the plural form. It's courses, which is plural for course. And then I'm going to do the same for students. So I'm going to take this one, open up my course, and then add the students navigation property. All right, so I'm going to save that. I'm going to go and add another migration, and this time we'll call it relation. We're going to call this many-to-many, many-to-many, and I'm actually going to call it skip navigation. Okay, and I am going to create this migration. All right, so now if we look at the migration, we can see that what EF Core is doing, it is creating a courses student table in the database. And there will be two columns, and each one of those columns will be a foreign key to the parent tables. All right. And then, of course, EF Core will then optimize and build that index and build that relationship. All right. So that's how easy it is to add a skip navigation. Also, one thing to note is that we didn't add another class here to our domain classes, because implicitly EF Core will skip that that class, because there's no need for it. All right, and that is why it's called skip navigation. Now, let's say we want to add additional columns to that table. So let's say, for instance, in our scenario, we want to see when a student joins a course and when the student kind of terminates that course and moves on to another course. So in order to do that, in order to record that those dates and timestamps, we need to create a payload table, all right, or a payload class. In order to do that, we are going to go and create this mapping table or mapping class called course student, and just make sure that you name it exactly the same as what. So if you already applied this migration and you want to make this change, just make sure that you name the new class exactly the same as the previous migration. Okay, in our case, we didn't apply the migration, but let's actually apply it. Just get it done. So I'm just gonna update. Where's my update? There we go. All right, so now I'm going to close it. And then I am going to apply. So I'm now going to go and create this new mapping table and call it course student. And then override the default generated code and create my mapping class. All right, now we need to tell EF Core to use this payload class. In order to do that, we need to go and override the onBinding or onModel creating method, and we need to go and add this code. All right, so we're going to go into our DB set, and we are going to override. And we want to say onModel creating, okay, and we'll delete that and copy and paste that code. So all we're saying is we want to create, or we want to add this mapping on the course and students tables or classes. We want this to be the mapping class, and this will be the relationship. A student can have many, can belong to many courses, and a course can have many students. All right, and then also we want to have a default value of this join course date property, and that must be whenever you add a new record, it must just add the current date and time. All right, so now we're gonna go and add this payload and run it. And as you can see, no new table is being added because we've named our class exactly the same as what the existing table is. And then all we're doing now is we're adding these two properties. And then, of course, we have this default property on the join course date, which will be current date and time. All right. So that is our many-to-many relationship. So if we now go and just apply it, update, and then we're also going to go and regenerate our diagram. Okay, now we're going to open it up. And if we're just going to zoom in slightly, we can see, okay, now we have a one-to-many to our core student, between course and core student, and we have a one-to-many between our student and our core student tables, or classes in this case, and then we still have our grade here. All right, and that is our many-to-many relationship. All right, so next we want to build a one-to-one relationship, and what we're going to do is we're going to create a one-to-one relationship between a grade and a teacher. So we'll have to add a teacher class. And then we're saying that a teacher can belong to a grade, but a grade does need to have a teacher, right? That will be our relationship. So basically what happens as well is that when you go and create a one-to-one relationship, one of the endpoints of the relationship has to be optional. The other side can be mandatory or must be mandatory, but one of them will have to be optional. All right. And in our case, the optional will be the grade ID or the grade for a specific teacher. All right. So in order to create that relationship, we're going to first add a new teacher. So we're just going to say teacher. And then I'm going to come to my blog post and just copy this code here. All right, and then of course I also already have the navigation property to grade, but because there's no foreign key ID here, EF Core will assume that the grade will be optional. All right, and then I am going to go to my grade class and I will add this teacher ID property or the foreign key there. And then I will also add my teacher DB set. So if I go to my DB context and below here, I'll add my teacher DB set, I'll save that, and then I will add or create my migration. So I'm just going to say 1-to-1. And now we can see that EF Core is going to add another column, teacher ID, to my grades table. And because the teacher ID is specified as an int, it will not allow null values. And then it's going to go and create my teacher table, create that index for optimization. And then also it's going to create that relationship between the teacher class or the teacher table and the grades table. All right. So now if I save all of that, I'm going to apply it. And then I'm going to also delete and recreate this diagram. And as you can see, there's a 1-to-1 mapping between teacher and grade. All right, and that is how easy it is to build relationships in EF Core 6. As you can see, it's very simplistic. We've hardly done any configuration in order to tell EF Core to create relationships. The thing that we should take note of is the way that I created those navigation properties. For instance, when I created a foreign key, I specified the class name and the ID label, and that together indicated to EF Core that I want to create a foreign key relationship. And then also when we build collections, one-to-many relationships, we use the plural forms of a specific word. And EF Core will then be able to make an assumption that I want to add a collection property to or collection relationship to my data model. And that is how easy it is to use EF Core 6. I hope this video was insightful. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions, please leave your comments below, or your comments or your questions below this video, and I will try and get to them as quickly as possible. In the next video, we are going to look at ways to add configuration files to our EF Core data model so that we can apply certain settings to our data model and overwrite default assumptions. All right. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye.